Welcome to our virtual workshop titled UCI Student Activism, Historical Perspectives. My name is Anna Reyes.
My name is Victoria Sanders.
We work alongside Dr. Marcela Ramirez Stapleton, the director at the CrossCultural Center. This online workshop is offered as part of a series of educational workshops during the 2021 Martin Luther King Jr. Symposium. For more information about upcoming events, please visit ccc.uci.edu/MLK. The content of this presentation has historically been delivered during oral histories as part of the Students of Color Tour at UCI. This presentation is an online version of the Incidents of Campus Activism, covered in the Students of Color Tour, which would be given on campus if we were to be in person.
The Students of Color Tour mission is meant to highlight historical and contemporary sides of the movement, the people of color at UCI, and the contributions of students, professors, and staff of color have made to the Irvine campus and the UC system. In light of the global pandemic and statewide Stay Safe at Home period, we opted to offer this history in a virtual platform. We created this workshop to increase access to these narratives and share moments of inspiration for all those who continue to advocate for justice in turbulent times.
First off, we want to start from the very ground up. Our campus sits on the land of the native Ahashiman and Tongva people. As we know from history, native people were killed, stripped of their land, abused, and threatened with erasure of their heritage and homeland. These people have lived in the land that you and I know as Irvine, Anaheim, San Clemente, San Juan Capistrano, and other cities since the Spanish colonizers came in the 1500s. Though they have been recognized by the state, native people of this land have been seeking federal recognition. They have historically been denied because they couldn't trace back their ancestry. They have no political influence, and other reasons. No federal recognition means they have no right to sovereignty, no funding nor protection by law. This is a great reminder for us to advocate for those whose voices continue to be ignored. Never forget whose land, space, knowledge, and privileges you benefit from. Seek to include all people and help those who are neglected.
Ron Reagan was the first and only Black student to attend UCI when the campus closed for the movement in 1965 with 1,589 students. Ron Reagan eventually became ASUCI president in his junior year. He worked to advocate for students of color on campus. In 1968 and 1969, there were approximately 29 Black students and 1 Black professor on a campus with a total enrollment of approximately 3,600 students. Diversity is still a problem at UCI, with the Black student population at around 2%, a figure which reflects Orange County's very small Black population for a large urbanized area in Southern California. The Department of African American Studies was established recently in the 2015 and 2016 academic year.
Only 2 years after its opening in 1965, UCI was faced with protests on campus. Student activism was alive and well in university campuses regarding anti-war protests against the Vietnam War, racism, and raising of student fees. Clark Kerr, then UC president, was supportive of free speech and political activity in universities. President Kerr tried to establish order as many students were being arrested. He advocated for amnesty for students from campus punishment, allowing the courts to decide on criminal charges. Reagan had advocated for raising student fees and motioned to move Clark Kerr as UC president due to his leniency with student protests. When clerk was fired by the UC Regents, more than 1,500 students and faculty gathered to protest. The area of the flagpole site has become synonymous with protests at UCI. In 1968, Eldritch Cleaver, a Black Panther Party leader, was invited to speak at UCI by English professor Steve Shapiro. Shapiro had originally invited Eldritch to be a lecturer, but was not supported by the university or department because they perceived Eldritch's views to be too radical. Subsequent to his talk, Shapiro was fired from the Department of English. His dismissal and the dismissal of other faculty, like Donald Brennan and George Kent of the History Department, sparked some of the first student protests. They were directed at then Chancellor Eldritch and UC Regent President and Governor of California, Ronald Reagan.
Beginning in 1968, UCI was host to an experiment in intercultural exchange in artistic and social scientific learning department. It brought indigenous people in Guatemala, Mexico, and Samoa to an undeveloped law on campus known as the Social Sciences Farm, a space for these visitors to demonstrate their craft as well as a laboratory for new methods in education and research. As faculty and students developed new theories for understanding human difference, the farm also served as a gathering site for members of the 60s counter-cultural movement. On October 9th of 1969, Angela Davis gave her first lecture at UCI to an overflow crowd of 1,500 students at the Science Lecture Hall. Of 1,500 students at the Science Lecture Hall. She noted that the Constitution of California states that the regions are to represent the people. It's time for students to say, "We are people, represent us." In 2003, Davis returned to UCI to give the Wellick Lecture in Critical Theory, named in honor of Renee Wellick, whose Library of Works in Critical Theory is housed in Maxson Library at the University of California, Irvine. The 1969 rally that occurred on the grounds of the UCI campus came to rise. Although the campus's early youth anti-Vietnam War protests were bound to happen. The Students for a Democratic Society, which was formed at the University of Michigan, created small chapters around multiple college campuses. The SDS that was created at UCI focused on ending the war and defending academic freedom. The Vietnam War moratorium called for the withdrawal of all troops from Vietnam and held a series of teaching discussions on racism in the military, biological warfare, imperialism, and capitalism, as well as the interfaith. The rallies were well situated between three of the most important zones at UCI: the library, the commons, and campus park, now known as Eldritch Park, which was used often for speeches, rallies, and strikes. In 1970, students organized to support the USW boycott, harvesting California and Arizona table grain. After successful boycott campaigns in 1967 to 1968, in March 10th of 1968, Chavez had concluded a 25-day fast for nonviolence. Latino and Filipino communities were most affected by the unfair treatment of farm laborers. In 1985, Chavez returned to campus to deliver a speech around his activities within labor organizations. In 1985, Chavez returned to campus to deliver a speech around his activities within labor organizing and the USW. The CrossCultural Center was created to be a space for students to imagine and inspire an equitable social justice campus, to affirm and develop intersectional cultural identities, and to build a more inclusive community. The values of the CrossCultural Center are activism, social justice, community, education, empowerment, and diversity. Since the founding of the CCC, 5 student umbrella organizations continue to be recognized by the CrossCultural Center: Alianza, American Indian Student Association, Asian Pacific Student Association, Black Student Union, and Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano Chicano. The number of individual organizations 105 umbrella organizations continue to grow, as it has since its establishment in 1974. The CrossCultural Center continues to provide many students a home away from home, and for many it remains a safe space from which students may launch their involvement in a myriad of campus programs and leadership opportunities.
There has been a true effort to reflect the diverse population of our campus for a long time. The Blade, one of the first newspapers at UCI, was one of the first to attempt a connection with the third world communities on campus. This was then changed to be directed to Black students in 1979. We have also had some Spanish publications made back in 1976 that helped the Latino community be more connected. This is quite impressive since we didn't even have a diverse curriculum before, and now we can learn many languages like Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, Spanish, Vietnamese, Persian, and so many others. Many programs have expanded to become more inclusive of the many local student communities as well as international students in order to build a sense of community. UCI website specifically focused on diversity states that through our differences, we are only stronger. And speaking of preserving our precious community, the Southeast Asian Archive at UCI, founded in 1987, is a site of historical preservation, mainly to document refugees and immigrants' experiences from Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, the three countries directly involved with the Vietnam-American War and formerly known as French Indochina. This means preserving rich visual arts such as textile, photos, speeches, and Vietnamese, Cambodian, and Hmong refugee stories. Stories like the ones mentioned in this quote, of thousands being drowned in the stormy seas, thousands harmed and killed by pirates, imprisoned by communists, tears, sorrows, and loss of loved ones, only strengthening the survivors' determination.
Changing demographics and campus growth after expansion and relocation of the CrossCultural Center was crucial. After considerable campus debate about the state of the new center, it was determined that the new CrossCultural Center would be located on Green Mall across from the administration building, now Eldritch Hall. On April 18, 1989, the new center opened its doors to the UCI community. The facility grew to be 3,400 square feet and consisted of a lounge, administrative offices, student offices, a small library, a student workroom, and two conference rooms, divided by a movable partition. In 1993, a group of students camped out and held a peaceful vigil demanding that the university allocate teaching positions to establish an Asian American Studies program. And there was no form of social media communication, what the students would do was get up in the middle of the night and make chalk party outlines along Brick Road with the caption, Asian American Studies is dead. Arrows would accompany the outlines and point towards the chancellor's office, and that was how people knew where to go. The students protested on April 22, 1993, by occupying the chancellor's office and having a 35-day rotational hunger strike. On June 10, 1993, the protesters decided to occupy the chancellor's office once again, to show their resilience and to continue their demand for Asian American studies. The students carried slogans that read, "World class, my ass." The slogans were meant to show that the university did not care for the 42.6% of students who were Asian American. The result of the hunger strike led to Professor Yang Chen, now the Associate Dean of the School of Humanities, to be hired in 1993 as a joint appointment in Asian American Studies and History. There was also a search committee that was formed to hire more faculty. The committee included one graduate student representative and one undergraduate representative. From this, Professor Dorothy Sugitawani and Professor Sarah Jen Yin were hired.
Continuing with the different resources for community building at UCI, one of the many programs that help preserve Latino-Chicano unity is Casa Chavez. Named after Cesar Chavez, Casa Chavez opened in 1994 It is an academic themed house located in Arroyo Vista housing. It hosts educational, cultural, and social events, as well as Chicano Latino faculty and community leaders lectures. During the November 5th, 1996 election, Proposition 209 was put on the ballot. Many students protested and testified that there was a lack of diversity on UC campuses, and that affirmative action could only enrich campuses. Affirmative action is the practice of favoring individuals belonging to discriminated groups, resulting in more diverse UC campuses. The name itself of Proposition 209 confused voters. It was called the California Civil Rights Initiative. Supporters called out the false definition that the name of the proposition carried, as it was actually not for civil rights. It attacked affirmative action directly, and therefore any discriminated group, from having any more chances to get into UCs. Proposition 209 was put on the ballot and passed. It amended the state constitution to prohibit state governmental institutions from considering race, sex, or ethnicity, specifically in public employment, public contracting, and public education. A proposal to repeal Prop 209, Proposition 16, was placed on the ballot for the 2020 California elections, but was rejected by a margin of 57% to 43%, implying that Californians were at least as supportive of race neutrality as they had been a quarter of a century earlier. California has the largest Asian American population in the U.S. As such, it is important to honor the big population of Asian immigrants that helped build up UCI. Located under the Humanities Bridge, these statues were donated by Frank Zhao, a retired real estate developer. This businessman was the main developer of Little Saigon in Westminster, where the statues came from. The Zhao Foundation continues to encourage education, exchange with Vietnam, as well as preservation of refugee stories. After the previously mentioned Proposition 209 passed in 1986, there was a decline in underrepresented students' enrollment. Budget cuts were ensued on UCI that threatened the outreach and retention programs. Students then proposed a referendum, a vote by the public to establish SOAR, the Student Outreach and Retention Center. It did not pass, but it did bring attention to the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs, who allocated funds to start SOAR. This would mean access to resources like employment opportunities, computers, textbook exchanges, peer-to-peer advising, support for campus organizations, scholarships, free printing, and a study lounge. SOAR officially opened its doors in 2011. In 2014, only 3 years later, students were able to pass the referendum and secure permanent funding for SOAR.
The increase in tuition, Janet Napolitano's involvement in the anti-immigrant SOAR program made her an inadequate president in the eyes of the students. On October 16, 2013, students assembled outside of Eldritch Hall to protest newly installed UC President Janet Napolitano. They carried coffins and accused her of putting the nail in the coffin of affordable higher education. After years of rising UC tuition, students protested Napolitano's confirmation throughout the UC because of the role she played in the anti-immigrant SOAR program, which deported an estimated 1.5 million when she served as Secretary of Homeland Security. They characterized recent cuts and tuition hikes in the UC system as creating the atmosphere akin to a cemetery and noted that Napolitano's $570,000 annual salary would be equivalent to the tuition paid by dozens of students.
A program that brought life to UCI students, however, is fresh. This student resource is quite new. It first started as a small pantry under SOAR in 2015. Thanks to its success, the 2016 Food Pantry referendum proposed a new quarterly fee of $3 for undergraduates and graduates, effective fall 2016. This has allowed Fresh to provide a pantry with fresh foods, run workshops on nutrition, cooking, financial literacy, a voucher program, social worker consultation, and resources for additional financial support.
In March of 2015, 6 legislative council members voted on Resolution R50 R7. Shortly after, a bill that would ban the display of any flags, including the American flag, in the ASUCI offices was created. The students cited that the flags have been flown in instances of American imperialism, and they hoped that the removal of the flags would create a more open climate of inclusion. In March 11th of 2015, after a strong native backlash and threats of violence, the executive board of the ASUCI voted to veto the flag banning legislation. The administration then issued a statement swiftly, strongly, and publicly, denouncing the 6 students who introduced the initial legislation. The controversy was slowly turned down, and Chancellor Thielman issued a statement that read, "These 6 students were acting in an official capacity as members of a small subset of our student government, known as Legislative Council, and it was outrageous and indefensible that they would question the appropriateness of displaying the American flag on this great campus. Ultimately, the referendum was revoked by the campus administration."
Thank you so much for joining us and looking back at UCI student activism. The information that was presented was provided to us mainly through the library database, the OC Register, the Online Archive of California, and Calisphere. While the content of the presentation continues to grow as movements for justice unfold, we hope that you can reflect on the ways that events which occurred in the past have changed and made UC Irvine the campus that it is today.